you would understand maybe why I'm so amused this week, considering last week's title. Last week, the message was titled, Hello God, Goodbye Comfort Zone. We talked about Moses at the burning bush and him getting his marching orders, so to speak. Not a very comfortable thing that he was called to do, go and be God's instrument in liberating the people of Israel from slavery in Egypt. So I found this amusing, given my title for today, Where Faith Meets Politics. Hello God, goodbye comfort zone. You know, I could go my whole life without preaching this message and be happy, but I'm going to forge ahead. Some people believe that there is no room in the church for talking about politics. A few of them have told me this. Yet in the Bible, I find there is no aspect of human life that is off limits to God. Everything from human sexuality to relationships with our spouse, with our children, with our parents, with our fellow church members, with the stranger, with the rich, the poor. It's talked about what we eat, talked about the need to take care of our bodies, even how we use the money that we have. I think we get no traction if we tell God that you cannot be a part of any part of our lives, whether that's politics or anything else. God desires first place in every aspect of our lives. The challenge for us is to keep our priorities in order, to keep God first, and then to let God order the other priorities. I have a colleague, he's a Pentecostal minister, and I heard him say this. I heard him say, many Christians allow their faith to be formed by their politics. When, of course, we know it ought to be the other way around. In our country, we have this tradition, and maybe you've heard this before, God first, and then family, and then country. And sometimes the second two are flipped around, country, then family. But you often hear that God first. Yet the reality in our country is different than that. The Barna Group did this survey on the strongest influences on personal identity. So they asked people, how do these things influence you? A lot, some, not too much, or not at all. And most people said that their family influenced them, their personal identity, a lot. Second place was being an American, influenced their identity a lot. And sadly, a distant third was my religious faith influences my identity a lot. In fact, the people who responded a lot for family, and you could say a lot for more than one thing, which is why the top line doesn't total to 100%. My family had almost two-thirds, 62% of Americans said that their family was a great part of their personal identity. As I said, coming in second, you had more than half of the people said, well, being an American is a big part of my personal identity. And then you can see down around a third, religious faith. More hopeful, though, is that when they ran the statistics on practicing Christians, which they defined as people who had been in worship once in the last 4 weeks, and added to that the number of people who said religion was important to them, the numbers jumped. It was like now greater than two-thirds, more than double people in the whole population survey, more than double said that, yes, my faith is a very strong influence on my identity. As Christians, if faith really does influence our personal identity, shouldn't our faith form our political views? Now, I know when the president says America first, he's not putting America in competition with God, but it still always catches me at me, because I know that human beings, when anything other than God is first, we get into trouble, right? It really does need to be God first. Love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. In fact, in Matthew's Gospel, that's the text that we're going to be our key text for this morning. And I want to read it to you because Jesus is quite clear about God's expectations. This is from Matthew chapter 22, beginning with verse 34. When the Pharisees heard that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. "Teacher, which commandment in the law is the greatest?" Jesus said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets." So, God being first, if we're going to obey that greatest commandment, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, strength is in there in another one of the Gospels, then it makes sense that God would order all of our other priorities. If God is first, then God gets to say what other things are important to us. Of course, we're always free to choose. We have free will, so we can go along with the program or we can go a different way. So the way I read this, as far as priorities go, if God is first, then and family, that web of relationships has to be right up there. So that means that, for instance, my beliefs about what's best for my country can't interfere with my love for my wife, my children, my parents, my siblings. Yet sadly, I heard stories, particularly following the 2016 election. I heard a story about grandparents who heard from their adult daughter or son, I forget which, that you can no longer see your grandchildren because you are so in our face about your political opinions, which are different than our own. We're not going to let you see our kids. It's just tragic. It's just tragic. And even continuing since that time, saw a statistic on the number of marriages that are breaking up because husband and wife don't see eye to eye on political, ideological things. In our church, we had a couple in December who told me, December 2016, that they were leaving the church because they had friends in the church that were so over the top about their political opinions, which differed from this couple, they no longer felt comfortable coming to church. That's tragic. That's tragic. Now, most of my marriage, Jill and I have belonged to different political parties. Yeah. How can this be? How can this be? Well, actually, there is so much that we agree on. So many things that were, more important than those things. Not a problem for us. But there's even one, and it's still today, a political hot button issue on which we disagree. And this does not adversely affect our marriage because the marriage is the higher priority. And these priorities are so important. And difference of political opinion, it certainly is not going to keep me from loving anybody in the church. I remember 2016, that election. I never told anybody who to vote for president. I had people in the congregation telling me who to vote for. I still love you if that was you. I still love you, whether you said I should vote for the person I voted for or not. Well, I'm going to make a big ask of you this morning. It's a big ask. You understand as the message goes along why I'm making this ask. First of all, I want you to know that I love the United States of America. And I think everybody ought to love the country of which they are a part. Doesn't mean you got to agree with anything, but we ought to love the country of which we are a part. And I think the United States is a great country. Now, one of the reasons I think that doesn't get a lot of play anywhere, but I'll share with you what it is. One of the things that I love about the United States of America is freedom of religion, freedom to assemble. We're celebrating, practicing both of those things this morning. Freedom to travel. And then freedom to, this will sound strange, but freedom to amass wealth. You see, I find the United States of America to be a great place from which to do good. And all of those freedoms make it possible for us to do incredible good in our own country and around the world. So, I love the United States. Now that said, the United States of America is not perfect. And one of our challenges is our form of government. I like the way Winston Churchill put it, Prime Minister of England wartime, WW2. Democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others. It's like inherently, democracy is going to be messy. But it doesn't have to be ugly. It doesn't have to be ugly. So, the ask this morning is this. Put your country ahead of whichever party you belong to. Put your country ahead of whichever party you belong to. Again, this is priorities, ranking priorities. Now, I'm not asking you to change parties. I wouldn't even know which one to tell you to join. I belong to a party with which I have significant differences. I used to belong to the other party with which I had significant differences. And for many years, my voter registration card said NPA, no party affiliation. But then I got tired of never voting in a primary, so I joined a party. I do not make a good Republican, and I do not make a good Democrat. And this bothers me not at all, because I'm keeping my eyes on Jesus. That is number one for me. And frankly, I think it is more important to be a good citizen of the United States than a good party member. So this makes me an issues voter. You know, when I look at who I'm going to vote for, a lot of it is where they line up on issues that I think are important. And I never vote for anybody who agrees with me on everything, because I haven't found a candidate like that, but I'm voting anyway. If we were to put the good of the country ahead of our opinions and ahead of the party line, maybe public discourse would become more civil. Wouldn't that be a joy? Maybe there would even be a trickle-up effect. That the people that we elect would be willing to hear each other and find some middle ground for the sake of the country. So, because a lot of us, you can tell me what surprised you, we're a little tired of the hyper-partisanship, people, as if, we're not all Americans. It's like, well, you disagree with me? No. In fact, when I was in kindergarten, on our grade card, we had this box we get graded on. Works and plays well with others. Oh, that every person that we elect would get an S, satisfactory, and not a U on this, right? Works and plays well with others. So the big ask this morning, put your country ahead of your party. Now the big question, we'll call it the big question of the day, is this. What is the church's proper role in politics? None? Well, if God were happy with that, I would be plenty happy with that too. Because as a preacher, I face the possibility that some will leave and never come back because I have said something that offended their sensibilities. Yet, the flip side of the coin is if I never say anything that might offend someone's sensibilities, I risk God leaving. Because we will cease to be the church. So what is the church's proper role in politics? Well, I'd like to consider where we might be had the church remained silent in the area of civil rights. The progresses that we've made in the last 50 years. Would we have gained this much had the church remained silent? Or in this country and other countries as well, child labor laws. What if the church had remained silent and those labor laws had not been enacted? Or if you want to go way back, the awful institution of slavery. Had the church remained silent, where would we be today? Now, I get separation of church and state. This goes along with the First Amendment of the Constitution. There's the Establishment Clause, that the government's not going to establish a religion. It's like there's not going to be any state religion in the United States. And of course, the church is not going to be the government. That's the flip side of that coin. But this does not mean that the church must remain silent. Our own part of the Church Universal, the United Methodist Church, we have a book of discipline that we go by. And part of that book of discipline is the social principles, one of which says this: the strength of a political system depends upon the full and willing participation of its citizens. The church should continually exert a strong ethical influence upon the state, supporting policies and programs deemed to be just, and opposing policies and programs that are unjust. Notice there's nothing in here about supporting this candidate or that candidate. It's about the policies. Is this just? Is this fair? Then we should be for it. If it's unjust and unfair, then we should be against it and seek change to that policy. Now, this is where, if I'm getting into hot water on this message, and I haven't already, this is where it will happen. Because I want you to consider how you will vote November 6th on this one issue. I'm not going to tell you how to vote. I'm just going to offer you questions to ask yourself. And if you are concerned, golly, now are we going to have a steady diet of political things in church? Well, the answer to that is no. It's the only time I'm going to talk political until November 6th. I got my messages scoped out. I will be sure next week to talk about some other difficult thing. All right, it won't be politics. So don't be worried, hair on fire. Oh, it's always about politics. It's not. This is what I'm going to ask you to consider how you're going to vote on this one single amendment, Amendment number 4.